So, good evening to all those of you who have joined us from India. I see a lot of you there, and also from the Far East. And good afternoon to our participants from the Middle East, and good morning to those of you who may have joined us from across the Atlantic. Uh, Very happy to have all of you here with us. We've all seen that from coronavirus lockdown to an economic slowdown to opening up. What we've experienced over the last 3 months has probably been the longest 3 months of our lives. Since March of 2020, we've all been combating a multiplicity of complexities that have been emanating from a plethora of existing and emerging risks. So while coronavirus may have drawn greater attention on risk management, I would say this pandemic also has provided a fertile ground for fraud risk with a combination of financial, IT, operational, and employee health related threats that make all our businesses vulnerable, susceptible, and create opportunities for fraudsters and unethical hackers. On behalf of MGC Global Risk Advisory and Sony Chakravarti & Co., I'm delighted to welcome all of you to a webinar that deals with significant learnings on risk management. So Robin, it's a real pleasure to have you with us, for you having taken time out for this very important topic that we'll be discussing today.
Thank you.
Very happy to have you with us, Sandhya. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, both of you. Everyone's looking forward to hearing your views. From predicting the unpredictable to working in an environment where you're managing the unpredictable. What has changed from an EWRM enterprise-wide risk management perspective pre-COVID and now?
I want to start with a teaser that I put on LinkedIn for this webinar. Some of my connections have read it. The typical risk manager of today, somewhere between reverence and relevance, somewhere between perfection and practicality, between desire and design. The risk professional had a safe and sweet spot, comfortable and safe. And this COVID pandemic has literally thrown the professional, and I'm a risk professional myself, in the middle of a perfect storm. That's the situation, if you ask me, pre and post COVID. And I want to take two frames of reference from a risk management point of view. One is a overall business context, and then a frame of reference from a risk function point of view. So from an overall business context, I think really some areas which were earlier important, but yeah, okay, good to have. How strong is your DRP? How have you tested it? BCP, etc. in a day. These have become more real than ever. The other one is how much leverage can technology give, whether it was collaboration to start with, the extent of digitization and retrievability, the realization that such assessments that get performed as part of risk management are real and therefore important, again, is a big change that businesses have come up with. And there are a wide variety of risks, which we earlier were always in our risk registers, but they were always theoretical and always had a little bit of a theoretical connotation. But there were a lot of risks which were technically theoretical. For example, resilience of network relationships, say customer relationship, vendor relationships. It used to be in every risk register, but it was a fairly theoretical risk. But today, people have realized that the key to survive is the strength of those relationships, whether the credit worthiness of the customer, ability of the vendor to deliver, the supply chain resilience. Another aspect, cash agility of the business. Many businesses, of course, there are businesses at different stages of cash availability, but cash agility was never looked at as a key risk. How do I generate cash when my inflow is not coming at the pace at which I want to come? How do I manage the risks around cash? Again, has come in as a important risk to the forefront. Now, another heightened risk is this around data security and privacy. CISOs in the past 3 months have had the most stressful time because they had to enable people to work, but work in a safe manner. And this is in the context that the environment is very exposed. So the paradigm of an office has changed. And therefore, then what does data security mean in this context has changed. A lot of risks which we earlier thought theoretical became very relevant. Now take a risk head point of view. The role has become more complex. So, in many organizations, risk is like an independent function which operates within a set of processes, assessments, etc. They have to provide assurance to the board. So it's like a outer circle kind of thing. But when the pandemic hit, most of us risk professionals realized that we have no value in the outside the circle. We have to get to what is real, what is inside the circle, and how do we, give assurance on management's capability. Let me take an example. This entire paradigm around trust and verify, they say auditors trust but verify, that's taken a completely new connotation. There are people at both ends. At one end, we are seeing behaviors where, there are cameras fitted on people's laptops to see whether they're standing in front of their laptop and how many times do they blink their eyes. At the other end, there is a lot of trust, and I want to take an example there of a friend of mine, a fellow auditor. He performed an audit of how much effective time were people actually working and how much time they were distracted on non-work related mediums. And his number was around 50 to 60%, 50 to 60% of effective work. So which means both sides of the spectrum exist. And how do we, as a risk professional, our traditional approach is that how do I guard this second end of the spectrum, where how can I ensure that people are working? And that's when the other end of putting all those draconian measures comes. But how do we understand the situation, and how do we tune the way we look at this more from a business point of view? We have to find what is healthy for the organization, what is right for the organization, and not what is right for the risk environment. So that's one example. Another example I really like to take is a failure of all of risk professionals, businesses as well. When China, way back in January, went into lockdown, the only thing we all worried about was supply chain resilience. We all kept thinking whether my stocks will come, how much pipeline stock I have, when will my container reach, and if my stocks are not coming, what is my alternate source? Not one risk professional came up with saying, if what's happening in China happened in my country, what would that mean to us? And this is not the first, community spread or this kind of virus which has happened, but still, in some form, our outside in as risk professionals is a very limited outside in. And I think risk professionals have now to learn to elevate their game on what a global perspective is, which is what will make them relevant. I can go on many examples, but what is a fundamental takeaway for me is that for businesses, embracing risk management is in the center of business has become more important than ever before. For risk professionals to put skin in the game and in the circle of responsibility has become equally important. If we are able to bring this together, that's when we can build a resilient risk function in post-COVID times. One of the ways we've looked at the risk function in the organization has always been on the risk environment and lesser on the risk culture. And that's maybe because it's a bit abstract and it's a difficult guess to make, or a difficult risk to explain. Let's take an example. Say a typical risk environment would talk about resilience in supply chain. So I have factories that produce certain products. In an ideal resilience matrix, I'll be happy if I have another factory which is at a reasonable geographical distance. So if this shuts down, I can go there and produce. But when the real risk of the pandemic hit us, it was not about how the factories function, but was about how the leadership were able to manage the dynamics of the pandemic. Secure approvals, passes, find trucks. Trucks can get stuck in the factory, get stuck on the way, get stuck at the customer. And really how the culture of the organization enabled the people on the front line, made the difference between success and more success and less success in some form. Now, whatever precautions, we have created as an organization saying this is my risk environment, etc. What really took people across is the sense of ownership and willingness. And this was an environment where people were taking personal risks. It was not a risk from a risk environment point of view, but people were taking personal risks, going out in the field and selling for the company. and how we could create that kind of culture, that kind of ownership, that kind of bias for action was what made the difference. So taking a step back, and I think as a risk professional, as we build a culture in the organization, we must find a way to recognize the DNA of the organization from a risk management point of view. The second aspect, what I spoke about earlier, which is, being able to operate inside the circle versus being able to, be part of the risk culture of the organization. And, how can you ensure that the organization lives and breathes the culture? Now, the last aspect is that the next 18 to 24 months are going to be very, very difficult for companies. Demand is challenged, growth levels are muted. Many companies are going to go through survival crisis. This will force leaders to behave differently, maybe aggressively, maybe look at out of the box solutions. And in that context, it is the role of risk professionals to guard the boundaries. What is the tone at the top? How the incentives are being set? Are people being pushed to aggression? Is there any possibility in the environment or in the way the culture is being built that we are creating opportunities for the integrity horizon to be breached? I think that's very important for risk professionals, and how we can play a part there. How do we sensitize? How do we pick up early warnings? People are also going to be stressed. It's not easy. Many companies, many people are not getting their variable pay. People have variable pay tied to kids' school fees. There are various other aspects that are connected to people's performance, which is going to play a part in the way they operate in the work environment. And therefore, a culture building of a risk professional will also include watching out for these frontiers and how the organization is behaving in this context, and how we guard the boundaries of integrity in some form.
Thank you, Monish. A current question in the current environment. The first one, is fraud risk going to go up? The answer is absolutely yes. Some of us would have got messages, WhatsApp messages saying that why don't you buy some PPE suits as low as that? And have you realized that 90% of those PPE suits are unauthorized? Nobody has authorized them. Have you also realized this PPE suit advertisement which we have got, they are traders, that they themselves know that does these suits prevent virus from going in? Have you noticed in India, the doctors and nurses are dying, not that they don't know what is it that they need to do, but the fact that the PPE suits they are wearing are fraudulently manufactured and fraudulently procured. It's as bad as that. Going up, many of us would have got WhatsApp or email messages saying that there is banking moratorium. Please give me details and I'll get you the moratorium faster. Can anybody get a moratorium faster than the company itself? The answer is no. But these are all frauds which are taking place. And there are on and on. I can give you hundreds and thousands of examples as to what's happening. The fact of the matter is, we are going to see more bankruptcies. We are going to see, as Sandhya said, people losing jobs. So what are the people going to do? They are going to take the shortcut method of fooling or cheating somebody else. So that's going to happen. So what do? As many of us over here are auditors, consultants, whatever, what do we do? The first action we have to take is cybersecurity. We have to see whether my cybersecurity works and there is adequate walls being created and so on and so forth. That's number one. Number two is data analytics. We have to analyze data to see, is something going wrong? Is somebody taking away something? Is someone taking advantage of what I have? Data analytics is going to be very important. Third is compliance, sheer compliance. That means there are certain rules and regulations as per Companies Act, the rules and regulations from ethical point of view, those needs to be met. Are the board of directors meeting once a quarter? Is there indeed a meeting which is taking place? Are they actually focusing on the meeting? Is the management making a management presentation during the board of directors meeting? As simple as that. If those compliances are not taking place, there is a problem, and which we can of course discuss later. Social media monitoring. Social media is going to be a hell of a risk. People are going to make money out of social media. Ladies and gentlemen, please try to understand. More the goodwill of your organization is, more are you at risk of social media. Somebody can actually take you for a big ride. So please be careful on that. Money laundering is a risk, and therefore money laundering control. It's very important. If the money has been made and the money has come in either from the bank or from the businesses where the money has been utilized, Has it gone to somebody's pocket? Or has the money been taken out of the country through shell companies and so on? So money laundering is a huge matter. Anti-bribery. Because bribery is an issue, you have to get into anti-bribery. You have to get people sign a piece of paper that they wouldn't take a bribe, they wouldn't be corrupt, and if they are found, even one example, they can be sacked. That, to some extent, will affect. Of course, everything is top down. The top boss has to be bribery-free and corruption-free. If that happens down the line, something can, of course, happen. And the most important detection, as many of your auditors, is the whistleblower. And the biggest number of frauds which gets detected in the world does not get detected through the auditors. Whistleblowing is going to be an important issue. Before I give a message, I want to put a perspective. When you look at the fraud world, there are two types of frauds: macro fraud and micro fraud. What is a macro fraud? Micro fraud, everyone knows. The cashier runs away with money. The purchase department takes bribe, and therefore you are not getting value. How do you control micro frauds? By proper internal control system. What is a macro fraud? A fraud which is structured by the chairman, the fraud which is structured by the board, a fraud which is structured by the entrepreneur. So when you look at the auditors and the management and the investors, I think that's what you asked, Monish, is that all of us have to understand, are we talking about the macro fraud or are we talking about the micro fraud? And therefore, most of the larger frauds are all macro frauds. The largest frauds are all macro. What should the auditors do? I think for everything, I will give you three things which I think we should do. The auditors to sign off. The responsibility of auditors is surely enhanced. And therefore, he or she has to sign off something which is, I would say, correct. True and fair is no longer true anymore. Now the world has become towards correct accounting and not true and fair view. We can still say, no, it's true and fair view, but that doesn't work anymore. So the first is the management meeting. You must have a management meeting to understand, is the management appropriate? Are they thinking appropriately? The next, because it's macro fraud, you have to think of what is the business structure? What is the business all about? Are they really manufacturing something? Are they really selling? Or is it a Ponzi scheme? Many of us sign things knowing fully well, and many auditors over here, that the stocks doesn't exist, the receivables doesn't exist, but the certification is taking place, working capital is getting drawn. So that's business structure is very important. And the third one is a financial performance. Is the company generating cash profit? If the company generating cash profit, then chances are that the fraud is less. The first chance of fraud is when the company fails to meet its bank obligations. And that's the trigger point of a fraud starting of an organization. So that's for the auditors. What about management? Poor management. We all work for the company and we realize the company is a fraud. What do you do? So the first is, what's the purpose of the business? What is this business all about? The second thing for the management is to understand short-term versus long-term. Moment the management or the organization is looking for short-term gain, that quarterly profit, this quarter's profit cannot be missed, is where they're cutting corners. Long-term, if an organization is focused on long-term, that organization will not, chances are there will be less fraud. Short-term focus, there'll be frauds for sure. And perhaps, not perhaps, and the most important one is the ethos of the chairman. It always boils down to the captain of a team. When a team wins, the captain is called to give the award. Why is it only the captain? Because generally, not mostly, it's always the captain which directs things. So from a management point of view, I think it's much more difficult. What happens to the investors? How does investor know and what do us investors do when these frauds are going to take place? The first is, what's the market goodwill of the organization? Is there any news item? Believe me, when it comes to fraud, if there is smoke, there is fire. Number two, what is the quality of the product? If you're an investor, you must invest in a product which you understand and the quality is good. Warren Buffett never invested in an IT company, but invested in Coca-Cola. Why? Warren Buffett says that when I drink my Coke, I understand my Coke. हमको समझ में आता है Coke कितना कैसा है. But IT हमको समझ में नहीं आता है, so I don't buy on IT. Warren Buffett, who am I to talk about it? Product quality is most important. And the last one, which goes back to the same what the management has to, the auditors have to look at is the company making cash profit? Investors, ladies and gentlemen, it's all about ROI. I don't believe ROI anymore. If the company is making cash profit and that cash profit is growing, please invest in that company. So investors is the most critical bit of it, because investors don't have information, and the information is based on all outside things which keeps on happening. And the PR guys can actually swing things around significantly. Therefore, product is very, very important. Cash profit is very important. And have you heard any kitsch pitch in the market is very important. Thank you, Monish.
My question is for Sandhya. Sandhya, you spoke about the a review of the efficiency part. So, are there any examples, especially on the contractual labor side, possible solutions that are currently being put in place by different companies?
Like I said, we have to establish the right trust climate. It has to be in between. You just can't leave it unattended. At the same time, we can't be breathing down people's, behind people's backs. So that's with that context said, a few areas. See, from a objectivity of outcome point of view, as leaders, as people that are getting outcomes, we have to get sharper and sharper. In an environment where we have a little more flexibility to review people outside just the outcome, but also the input parameters, it's different. But in an environment where the input parameters don't lend itself to effective review, the monitoring of the output parameters become very important. So one of the things that like some tech companies are trying to do when they are working with extended partners is make contracts which are more outcome driven and less time and material, because it then makes it that much more easier to have an outcome at the end of this without having to supervise. That's one aspect. The other aspect is that in terms of communication, we have to expand our sphere of horizon of how much we communicate with people. It is becoming more stressful these days. People say we're on calls all the time, but it's more important than ever before that we have the pulse of what's happening. So a typical hierarchy based communication where you are only talking to people that are in your next to the hierarchy, and therefore you're not communicating with people when you're leaving the chain of command to manage the communication, also creates distance. And in an office kind of environment, you'll have the pulse of what's happening. Those informal chains are gone, and therefore for one to reach out more effectively and communicate, not just with own employees, but also with contract employees, is another aspect which helps us absorb the pulse of what's happening. A third and the last aspect really is, like we spoke about earlier, a culture where everyone feels belonging and wanting to deliver drives a very different behavior. Whether it is own employee, whether it is contract employee, it doesn't matter. At least I have always in my career worked with a mix of talent, where own plus contract. And in my career, I've never differentiated somebody saying this is a known employee or this is a contract employee. And when you create that culture where everyone feels a part of the final outcome or a part of the journey, then to that extent, a lot of the energies get focused in the right direction. So I don't know if that was your specific question in terms of time, or you're looking at some other aspect of contract management, but that would be my answer.
I have a question each for Robin and Sandhya. So let me begin with Sandhya. Now that the risk is more suddenly come to the fore, do you therefore feel that the balance has changed? That's part number one. Part number two is this, that since risk management is largely the purview of management, have risk managers done themselves out of a job, or do they need to reinvent themselves there? The role of a risk manager has changed dramatically. And so how do you think you're affected? And anecdotally, Robin, I used to always feel that in my lifetime, there will be a time where cash basis of accounting will come to the fore. That will become the normal way of accounting. But more importantly, with how things look today, and you mentioned fraud, absenteeism is going to be something which is quite regular now, working with much less people, working remotely, working online, working through conferences. Don't you think new SOPs might be needed for every organization, and they're not thinking in those terms right now? And probably that is one reason why fraud is likely to increase. And do you think there is a case for actually relooking at all your systems?
I'll start with your second question first, which is, have risk management people themselves out of job? More than ever before, because one is that organizations are going to be extremely tight on cash, extremely tight on resources, and therefore functions that can create value are the functions that are going to exist, and which is why I call it a perfect storm. If the risk management function is not going to be able to create value to the organization, I don't think the function will exist, at least in the form or seniority at which it existed before. I think there is still an obligation that is there, required from a reporting point of view, and therefore there will be some parts of the function that will not go away, but the form and importance and the cabin and the cushy chair may not exist in some form if the function cannot create value. And that segues me to your first question, which is that assurances are backward looking and risk management is forward looking, and are they conflicting with each other? I think it's a lot to do with the cultural context of the organization. If the cultural context of that, and it may sound to be a cliche answer, but that's very, very real. If the cultural context of the organization allows the assurance function the level of intimacy into the risk environment of the business, so the assurance function knows what to look at. If the organization thinks that in that fashion, then the functions can coexist. But sometimes, because the reporting of the assurance function is different, and therefore the assurance function also has an obligation in terms of being able to point out where the so-called mistakes are in a candid way, I think it then makes the role that much more tricky as to how the control environment is managed, while at the same time being able to add value to the management. The audit function, as long as it's going to be something that the audit committee needs to know and feel assured about, it will never find its place in the risk management function. When the audit function gets called upon by the management to feel confident about what's happening, and therefore the management is proactive with the audit function in terms of sharing the risk landscape, and that's when the audit function will be able to manage both the roles in a non-conflicting way and also be able to create value. I am more and more convinced that the functions will subsume more than before, because I think organizations will have to take more sharper choices, and that much more it will call on the maturity of the risk leaders to be able to play that balance. I don't think anymore the auditor who will find faults is going to be relevant. An auditor who can create value, a risk leader who can create value, while giving assurance on the control landscape, is the individual that's going to be relevant.
Arvind, I'll take the other one.
I just wanted to say thank you, Sandhya. That was a very honest answer.
Now, you have asked a question, is the future of business changing? Grossly. Two significant changes going to happen. One, cash is going to be the king. No, mistake. Cash is going to become the emperor. So the working capital cycle is going to shrink. Right. All those days, buying on cash and selling on credit, finished. Those business cycles are finished. Not business cycle, business structures. And therefore, you have to buy on credit and sell on cash if you can. Business cycles are going to go down. That's one issue. Number two, in our factories, especially in India, we have to perforce employ lesser people. There has to be some discipline of social distancing. If you go to the SME sector, which is 80% of all the businesses in the country, they will have to practice social distancing. Otherwise, their people are going to fall sick and die. So there will be social pressure, forget about government pressure to do. Therefore, per se, we have to employ lesser people. And therefore, what will happen? The productivity has to go up. The business concept, the way we manufacture, the way the business cycle have to go. There has to be a complete change in the way businesses are going to function in the days to come. Working capital shortening and social distancing, two very important issues, what definitely going to happen.
Robin, it is to you, how good or bad have regulators been in implementing the law? You spoke about companies which you can see some smoke. Is there indication that the regulators may be moving in to contain the fallout? If I can add one line to the question above, if the regulators cannot do the small things well, how can they do the bigger things well enough? This is from Ashutosh.
So this question is on the role of regulator, which is here SEBI. SEBI has actually now, over the last few months, installed very high quality artificial intelligence to catch insider trading. So while SEBI is doing good work on areas of insider trading, well, that's what they are generally doing. But when it comes to stock market flare up, unfortunately, in the public domain, we are not able to understand their working. So yes, there is a lot more is expected from our market regulator. I still believe that they have done something. They're 50-60% through. They still have another 30-40% to cover. So the question is very valid. How can the market regulator do much better things, bigger things, when the smaller things they're not able to catch? I agree with you.
Thanks, Robin. Thank you so much, Sandhya. I think there were a few more questions that were going to come your way, but I think we'll just put them to you offline so that